The night was dark, the rain pouring relentlessly onto the streets. A man in a tailored suit, face grim with fear, struggled to free himself from the wreckage of a burning car. The flames lit the sky, and the air was thick with smoke. The sharp screech of tires echoed as a figure darted from the shadows, moving faster than anyone could comprehend. A teenage boy wearing a tattered jacket, his hair damp from the rain, lunged at the car's broken door. He didn't hesitate. His hands, rough and calloused from living on the streets, fumbled for the handle, pulling it open with all his strength. Inside, the CEO of one of the biggest tech companies in the world, Victor Moore, gasped for air, his face smeared with blood. "Hang on," the boy shouted, voice cracking with urgency. His eyes locked onto the burning engine and back to the man inside. Without thinking, he dragged Victor out of the car and onto the cold, wet asphalt, just seconds before the flames exploded. In a burst of light, Victor Moore lay unconscious, barely breathing, his body a mix of blood and bruises. The boy, chest heaving with adrenaline, looked down at the man he'd just saved, a stranger, someone who had everything he could never dream of lay at his feet. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more true stories. The lost dream. Jake Williams wasn't always the boy who lived on the streets. There was a time when he was someone with big dreams, someone who believed that hard work and ambition could get him anything. He had always looked up to his father, Robert Williams, who had built a successful business empire from the ground up. Jake had grown up in the world of boardrooms, fancy dinners, and the smell of fresh leather from his father's office. It seemed like everything he wanted was within reach, but all of that changed in an instant. It was supposed to be a normal business transaction, a deal that would push the family business to new heights, but things went terribly wrong. A financial scandal erupted, and overnight, the Williams family name became synonymous with corruption and deceit. Investigations began. The media turned its harsh spotlight on them. Headlines screamed of shady dealings and unethical practices. And before Jake could even understand what was happening, his father was arrested. The company, once a beacon of success, crumbled. The legal battles stretched on for months, leaving the family financially destroyed. Jake's world fell apart. His mother, heartbroken and shattered, couldn't handle the pressure. The whispers, the public ridicule, it was too much. She took Jake and moved to another state, hoping to escape the scandal. But the damage had already been done. She had to start over. She couldn't support Jake any longer, so she placed him in a foster home. Her departure hit him like a punch to the gut. She had no choice, but Jake couldn't help feeling abandoned, as if he was just another piece of trash thrown out by the very life they once built. Alone, helpless, Jake's anger and grief grew in the silence of the new city he now called home. The foster home was different. It wasn't like the life he once had: the fancy dinners, the designer clothes, the feeling of safety in his father's success. Here, he was just another teenager, lost among a group of kids who had nowhere else to go. No one cared about his past, his name, or his dreams. They all had their own struggles, their own pain. He quickly realized that the world didn't care who he used to be. His family's wealth, nothing but a forgotten memory. Jake spent a year bouncing from one foster home to another. His attempts at fitting in with the new kids failed. He wasn't the same anymore. The boy who used to be eager and full of ambition was now a shadow of himself, consumed by bitterness and confusion. The world he had known was gone, and the future seemed like a dark road, with no end in sight. By the time Jake turned 18, he had left the foster system, with no family to turn to and no friends left behind. He made the only choice he felt he could. He ran away. He ran from everything, from the memories of his father's downfall to the people who had forgotten him. He ended up on the streets of the city, with nothing but the clothes on his back and the will to survive. His days were long and filled with the grim task of surviving. He found odd jobs here and there, washing dishes in restaurants, sweeping sidewalks, or doing anything that paid, but the money was never enough, and the people who hired him never treated him with respect. He became just another part of the invisible underclass of society, someone who was ignored, someone who didn't matter. Jake quickly learned the hard way: the world doesn't care about people like him. He was a product of failure, and he had to make his own way. He learned how to blend into the shadows, how to avoid the cold stares of passersby, how to beg for enough change to buy a loaf of bread. The streets taught him how to survive, but they also took something from him as humanity. He stopped dreaming, stopped caring. He became numb. Yet, somewhere deep down, a part of Jake still wanted to fight. Every night, when he closed his eyes, on the cold pavement, he remembered the boy he used to be, the one who believed in success and had dreams of greatness. But that boy seemed far away, buried beneath layers of grief and despair. One cold, rainy night, Jake sat against the brick wall of an alley, his jacket pulled tightly around him. He was starving, his stomach growling with hunger. He hadn't eaten in over 24 hours, and it was starting to take its toll. The thought of scrounging for food seemed pointless. The city was a big, indifferent place, and no one cared. As he sat there, lost in his thoughts, the screech of tires broke through the silence. His heart skipped a beat. A loud crash echoed through the alley, followed by a burst of flames. Jake jumped to his feet, instinctively running toward the sound. He didn't think, he just moved, driven by something deep within him, the instinct to help, the instinct to do something. When he reached the wreckage, the sight stopped him in his tracks. A luxury car had crashed into a lamppost, its engine already catching fire. The driver's door was crushed, and the man inside was unconscious, blood oozing from a gash on his forehead. Jake's heart raced as he realized the man was alive, barely breathing, trapped in the car. He could see the flames licking at the car's interior, the smoke billowing around them. Without thinking, Jake rushed to the car, desperately pulling at the door, his hands slick with blood and rainwater. The door wouldn't budge. His heart pounded in his chest, and panic rose in his throat. He couldn't let the man die. He had to save him. It wasn't easy. Every second felt like a lifetime. But finally, with a grunt of effort, the door gave way. Jake hauled the man, now clearly a man of power, a businessman, out of the wreckage. He pulled him onto the wet pavement, just as the car exploded in a burst of flame. The heat blasted his face, and Jake felt a rush of adrenaline. As he caught his breath, looking down at the man he had just saved, Jake's mind raced. Who was this man? What was he doing here? But most importantly, why had Jake risked his life to save him? And little did Jake know, this one act of courage would lead him into a world far beyond anything he had ever known. A world of power, corruption, and dark secrets, and it would force him to confront a past he had long buried. Jake's act of courage didn't go unnoticed. The man he saved, Victor Moore, the CEO of a massive tech company, wakes up in the hospital, disoriented but alive. Victor insists on meeting Jake to thank him, but the meeting turns into something more than either of them expected. Victor's company is tangled in a massive financial scandal that has ties to Jake's father's fall from grace. As the story unravels, Jake discovers that the very man he saved is tied to the destruction of his family, and the truth behind the scandal is more complicated and dangerous than either of them could have imagined. This chapter could explore Jake's inner conflict as he starts to question his motivations, his role in the larger scheme of things, and the complicated relationship between him and Victor. It sets up a suspenseful and emotional journey ahead. A fateful meeting. Jake had never imagined that saving a life would bring him into a world so different from the one he knew when he first pulled Victor Moore from the wreckage. He didn't expect much. The man was unconscious, wounded, a stranger, in a shiny suit, someone who seemed so far removed from Jake's reality. But when Victor woke up in the hospital a few days later, it was clear that the world Jake had once belonged to was about to collide with the world he had fled. The hospital room was sterile, the lights harsh against the soft, muted beeping of machines. Jake stood just inside the door, his hands buried in his pockets, unsure of what to do next. He had been told to wait until Victor's doctors gave the okay. But now that the time had come, he wasn't sure how he felt. What did Victor want from him? What did he expect? Victor Moore lay in the bed, his face a pale mix of bruises and fresh bandages. His eyes were open, but he still seemed lost, as though the crash had stolen more than just his physical health. He had no memory of the accident, just fragments, the taste of metal in his mouth, the feeling of suffocating smoke. "Jake," Victor said weakly, his voice hoarse, "I remember you. You saved my life." Jake hesitated for a moment before stepping forward. "I did what anyone would have done," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. He had nothing to say to someone like Victor Moore, someone whose wealth and power had never once given him a second thought. What could they have in common? Victor's gaze sharpened, studying him. "No, you didn't. Most people wouldn't have risked their life for a stranger, especially someone like me." Jake shifted uneasily. "I didn't do it for you. I just couldn't leave you there to die." Victor let out a slow breath, his expression softening. He studied Jake carefully, as though trying to understand this young man who had saved him. After a long pause, he spoke again. "I owe you everything, and I don't know why, but I feel like there's more to this than just a random act of kindness. Something I don't understand." Jake's chest tightened. He couldn't explain it, not even to himself. Why had he helped? Why had he risked his life for a man who had no connection to him whatsoever? He should have walked away. It was what everyone else would have done. But he didn't, and now he was standing here, facing a man who could change his life. Victor motioned to the chair beside the bed. "Please sit. We need to talk." Jake hesitated, but eventually complied, settling into the uncomfortable plastic chair. He looked at Victor, who seemed so out of place in the sterile room, so different from the polished, public figure that Jake had seen in news articles and on TV. There was something more human about him now, something vulnerable. "I don't know how much you remember," Jake began, "but your car, it was caught in a crash. I pulled you out before the fire got to you." Victor nodded slowly. "I remember the explosion. I remember the flames, but nothing before that. Do you know why I was there? What happened?" Jake shook his head. "I don't. I just know you're the CEO of a big tech company, and I'm just a guy who lives on the streets." His words were blunt, a reflection of the sharp bitterness that had settled deep within him. Victor seemed to think for a moment before speaking again. "I want to help you, Jake. You saved my life, and I believe in repaying that kind of debt. But I have to be honest with you. There's something you need to know about me." Jake raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Victor sat up slightly, wincing at the pain. "My company, Mortec, is in trouble. I don't know if you follow business news, but we've been under investigation for months now. There are accusations of insider trading, money laundering, and corporate sabotage. The kind of stuff that ruins people's lives." Jake's mind raced. This was the man who had been part of the system that destroyed his family. This was the man whose company had pushed his father to ruin, whose greed had caused so much pain. He wanted to walk away right then and there, leave the room, and forget everything. But something, maybe the lingering fragments of the person he once was, stopped him. Victor continued, "I'm not a criminal, Jake, but I've been caught up in something far beyond my control. The truth is, my father made some decisions when I was a kid, decisions I didn't understand at the time, and now I'm facing the consequences of those decisions." Jake's heart pounded. He had heard whispers, rumors about Mortec's connections to various scandals, but he hadn't known the specifics. And now, here it was, the man he had saved was directly connected to the unraveling of everything he had once known. Victor's voice faltered, as though weighed down by the burden of his own words. "I didn't ask for this life, but I have to take responsibility for what happened, even if it wasn't my fault. I want to make things right, but I need your help." Jake was silent for a moment, trying to process what Victor had just said. The weight of it all, of what had happened to his family, of how his life had been thrown away, crashed over him like a wave. Here he was, sitting in front of the very man whose actions had sent his father to prison, whose company had helped destroy the foundation of his life. "I don't want your pity," Jake said, his voice low. "I don't want your money or your help. I didn't save you for that." Victor looked at him, his expression hardening, but not in anger and understanding. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness, Jake. I'm asking for your help to right a wrong. There are people out there who need to be exposed, people who were behind the scenes of everything that happened to your father. I can't do it alone." Jake leaned back in the chair, his mind whirling. There was no going back. He couldn't just walk away from this. The past, the lies, the betrayal everything was pulling him in. Maybe it wasn't about forgiveness. Maybe it was about something else. Maybe it was about justice. "I'll help you," Jake said finally, his voice steady. "But this isn't about you. It's about my family, and it's about getting the truth out." Victor nodded, a look of determination in his eyes. "Then let's start. We have a lot of work to do." Jake and Victor begin working together to uncover the layers of corruption that have plagued their families. They start with the financial records, sifting through documents that lead them down a dark path of corporate espionage and betrayal. As they get closer to the truth, they discover that the web of lies is deeper than they ever imagined, and the people behind it are more dangerous than they expected. Jake's struggle becomes not only a fight for justice, but a fight for his own redemption as he faces the painful truths about his family's past and his role in unraveling it. Uncovering the past room was dim, with only the soft hum of the overhead lights filling the silence. Victor sat across from Jake, a stack of papers and a laptop between them, both of them staring at the digital screen that had become the portal to the truth they were hunting. The air felt heavy, tense with the weight of what they were about to uncover. The walls of the office seemed to close in around them as they dug deeper into Mortec's financial records. Every click of the mouse, every document they opened, brought them closer to a world they hadn't fully understood yet, one that could change everything. Victor's fingers trembled as he scrolled through a series of transactions that didn't add up. "This," he muttered, "this is where it all started. My father's dealings with offshore accounts, shady investments in companies that were barely on the radar. But there's something off about these transactions. There are names here I don't recognize, and the amounts, they're staggering." Jake leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. He had no formal business experience, but he had learned a lot in the streets about following the money. "Who are these people?" he asked, his voice quiet but urgent. "And why are they tied to your father's company?" Victor scrolled further. "These names, they're linked to financial brokers, shell companies that never really existed. The money was funneled through multiple accounts that have now vanished. I think my father was set up. Someone used him as a pawn in a much larger scheme." Jake's mind raced. "So, your father wasn't the mastermind behind the whole thing?" He couldn't believe it. All his life, he had heard about how corrupt the Williams family was, about how his father had failed everyone. But now, Victor was telling him that the story was different, that his father wasn't the villain after all. Who set him up? Who's behind this? Victor looked at him with haunted eyes. "That's what we need to find out." They spent the next few days piecing together the puzzle. Every lead they chased seemed to uncover more questions than answers. The deeper they dug, the more they realized that the scandal wasn't just about corporate greed. It was about manipulation, control, and deceit. Someone had orchestrated everything from the shadows, making sure that both the Williams and Moore families would fall, ensuring that the powerful forces behind the scenes would remain untouchable. "Whoever did this," Victor said one evening, leaning back in his chair, "they're still out there, and they have no intention of being exposed. That's why they've been covering their tracks. They're too powerful." Jake's heart thudded in his chest. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It wasn't even just about his father's name being cleared. It was about survival. Someone was watching them. Someone knew they were getting too close. Victor's phone buzzed, and he picked it up. Glancing at the screen, his face paled as he read the message. "It started," he whispered, more to himself than to Jake. "They know we're digging. I've been warned." Jake's stomach tightened. "Warned? By who?" Victor's eyes darted nervously round the room. "I don't know. It's not just a threat anymore, it's real. The people behind this have more power than I ever thought, and now they've made it personal." Jake stood up, his hands clenched into fists. "We have to keep going. We're not backing down." Victor nodded, but his face was etched with concern. "I know, but we need to be careful. Whoever is behind this isn't going to let us walk away, and we have no idea how far they'll go to silence us." Into the Freth next day, things started happening fast. The threats grew more direct. Victor's office was broken into, the files they'd been working on were stolen, and his personal security system was hacked. It became clear that someone was determined to stop them from finding the truth, but it only fueled Jake's resolve. He had lost everything once. He wasn't going to let this slip away. They couldn't go to the authorities. Not yet. Not when they didn't know who to trust. Whoever was behind this had deep connections, and exposing them without proof would be suicide. They had to find the evidence, and they had to do it quickly. Victor's contacts began disappearing, one by one. People who had once been close allies turned their backs or stopped responding to calls. Jake could feel the weight of it pressing in on him, but there was no turning back now. He had already seen too much, and as much as he wanted to give up and walk away, he couldn't. This was his chance to do what he had always dreamed of doing, fighting back against the corruption that had torn his life apart. As they continued to dig, they found a pattern, one that led them to a group of high-profile businessmen, powerful figures with links to international crime syndicates, people who had operated in the shadows for years, pulling strings behind closed doors. It was the kind of power that didn't come from money alone. It came from manipulation, from controlling the flow of information, from holding the fate of entire industries in their hands. But the more they learned, the more dangerous it became. Victor's life was at risk, and now, so was Jake's. One night, as they were going through old files in a dimly lit office, the door swung open. A tall, shadowy figure stepped inside. Jake's heart stopped for a second, the hairs on the back of his neck standing up. Victor was the first to speak. His voice steadied despite the tension in the air. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "You've gone too far." The figure smiled, but it wasn't a smile of reassurance. It was a threat, thinly veiled behind a polite facade. "We've only just begun," the figure said. Conclusion: the price of truth. Night seemed endless, the city outside wrapped in shadows. Victor Moore and Jake Williams were no longer the same people who had first met. Under the most unlikely of circumstances, in a matter of weeks, they had delved deep into a world of corruption, secrecy, and danger, one that threatened not only their lives, but everything they had once believed in. The figure who had stepped into the office that night was no stranger. He was a man Victor had once trusted, a man who had known his father, someone who had been at the very heart of the corruption that had shaped both their destinies. Now, as he stood before them, the gravity of the situation became undeniable. Their investigation had crossed a line, one they could never uncross. "We've only just begun," the figure had said, his smile cold and calculating. "But the price of the truth is steep, and it's one you're both unwilling to pay." It was a moment that tested everything Jake had come to understand about right and wrong. Here he was, standing with a man who had once been a stranger, someone whose company had destroyed his family, but who had now become his ally. Victor had been trapped in a web of deceit for years, and now it was up to them to expose the truth, no matter the cost. The days that followed were filled with tension, their every move watched, their every decision weighed. They couldn't trust anyone, not the authorities, not the people who had once been part of Victor's inner circle. Every lead they followed brought them closer to the heart of the conspiracy and to the realization that the people behind it were far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. The walls were closing in, and they knew that time was running out. There were moments when the fear of failure, the fear of losing everything, threatened to swallow them whole. But Jake and Victor had come too far to turn back now. They had both lost so much: Jake, his family and his future; Victor, his legacy and his peace of mind. They had been dragged into this fight by forces beyond their control, but now they were taking control of their own fate. The final breakthrough came when they uncovered a critical piece of evidence, a document that tied the criminal syndicate to the highest levels of government and business. It was the smoking gun they had been searching for, but with it came a new set of challenges. If they released it, they would expose a network of power that stretched far beyond anything they had ever anticipated. The stakes had never been higher. In the end, it was not just about justice for their families, it was about reclaiming their dignity, about standing up to the darkness that had clouded their lives for so long. They knew that whatever happened next, they would never be the same. The last moments of the story were quiet. It was a simple, solemn exchange between two men who had fought through their differences, their fears, and their pasts. The document was sent to the press. The world would now know the truth, and the powerful figures who had orchestrated the web of lies, would finally be exposed. But even as the news broke and the scandal shook the world, there was no moment of triumph. Instead, there was only a quiet sense of relief. They had done what they could. But the price of truth was never easy. It left scars. It left wounds, but it also left a sense of closure. A sense that, at last, the right thing had been done. As Jake looked out over the city, he thought about everything he had lost and everything he had gained. He wasn't the boy he once was, the boy who had dreamed of success, who had believed that the world was a place of fairness. No, he had seen too much to believe in such things anymore. But he had learned something more important. He had learned that redemption doesn't come without sacrifice. It doesn't come with a perfect ending, but it comes with the courage to face the truth, no matter the cost. Victor, too, had changed. He had lost his empire, but in doing so, he had found something far more valuable, his integrity. And for both men, that was enough. The lesson: this story is not just about power or money. It's about the choices we make in the face of adversity. It's about standing up for what's right even when the world around us is falling apart. It's about reclaiming our humanity in the most unexpected of circumstances and realizing that, even in the darkest of times, we have the ability to fight for something better. When faced with corruption, with the forces that seek to pull us down, we have two choices: to be silent and compliant, or to rise, no matter the consequences. It's easy to feel powerless, to believe that one person can't make a difference. But this story proves that even the most unlikely hero can change the world. Sometimes, it only takes one act of courage to ignite a revolution, to bring justice where it's been denied for so long. The truth is messy, it's painful, and it's often harder than we want to admit. But it's always worth fighting for. Call to action: if this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. There are so many hidden truths in our world, waiting to be uncovered. Let's stand together and fight for justice, for truth, and for the courage to do what's right.